Hello, everyone, and welcome to Novara Live. I am your host today, Dalia Gebrial, and joining me tonight is Helena, aka No Justice MTG, on YouTube and Twitch. Helena, this is our first time together. How are you doing?
It is. Yeah, it is our first time together. Very much looking forward to a big fan of yours up to this time. So really good to be sharing a platform with you.
Great to hear. So coming up later tonight, the Tories have somehow outdone themselves when it comes to delusion and impracticality with their latest Rwanda development. And an Israeli minister celebrates the shooting of a 13-year-old boy in the West Bank. And finally, Guardian editor Kath Viner is facing accusations of censorship at the newspaper over Israel's war in Gaza. So make sure you stay tuned for all of that. The Tories are facing pressure to return £10 million to their top donor after it was revealed he made racist comments about Diane Abbott. Frank Hester is CEO of healthcare tech firm The Phoenix Partnership. In 2019, he told colleagues that looking at Abbott makes you, quote, want to hate all black women, and that the MP should be shot. This is a serious allegation, serious enough that Abbott has now reported Hester to the police. However, the Tories think it's not serious enough for them to return the money. Cue Business Minister Kevin Hollinrake performing mental gymnastics on BBC Breakfast.
What we do know for sure is that he is the Conservative Party's biggest donor. £10 million he has given to the Conservative Party. And a lot of people, even within your own party, are saying this morning that doesn't sit right, that you should give the money back. Do you agree?
No, I don't agree with that. If Mr Hester was a racist, if he refused to apologise for what he said, that would be different. He's apologised. I don't believe he's racist. I think in terms of the context of things we've got going on now, and I'm here to talk about the post office and trying to exonerate postmasters and compensate them, there are, I think, bigger issues at play here that we need to focus on in terms of probably greater priorities for the most of the people watching this programme.
I think a lot of people watching this programme have been deeply shocked by this story over the last, 36 hours now. And for them, it is a big issue because it tells them a lot about the government and what the government thinks and how it operates and about community cohesion. And they've been really disturbed by this and they would like you to give the money back. I mean, if Mr Hester today said, right, I'd like to give you another £10 million, would you take it?
Well, on the basis that we don't believe Ms Hester is a racist, yes. But I've got to say, all these people I spoke to yesterday, I spoke to members of the public and postmasters and many other people, nobody mentioned this story to me in terms of the context of what we're trying to do, which is overturn convictions and pay people compensation. That's what I'm really focused on, and I think quite rightly so.
So let's just be absolutely clear. Yesterday, the Prime Minister said that this man's alleged comments were racist and wrong. And you say if this same man wanted to give another £10 million today to the Conservative Party, you'd take the money?
Yes, that's how I understand the situation, yes.
Conservatives there showing us exactly who they are. If only we would believe them. So now more allegations against Hester are coming to light. In 2019, he called a meeting of his, quote, foreign workers to address concerns over racism at his company. The Guardian report reads this. Addressing a number of staff members on a crowded balcony for the meeting at the Phoenix Partnership headquarters, overlooking the railway line in Horsforth, Leeds, Hester asked if there were, quote, no room for the Indians then. He then said, climb on the roof, like on the roof of the train there maybe. That was a comment that he made at a meeting that had been called specifically to defend himself against accusations of racism. Just in case you thought it couldn't get any worse, he also said this. Hester also spoke of a forthcoming work trip, saying, quote, I'm looking forward to going to Malaysia so that I can make new jokes. I don't know any jokes about Malaysian people, but I'm sure we'll find them. I'm sure we'll find them. There've got to be some, haven't there? I mean, I'm sure if they exist, he will find them, that's for sure. All of this paints a damning picture of a Conservative Party that is happy to sweep racism under the rug when it benefits them. Keir Starmer was happy to twist the knife at Prime Minister's questions.
Is the Prime Minister proud to be bankrolled by someone using racist and misogynist language when he says the member for Hackney North and Stoke Newington makes you want to hate all black women?
Mr. Speaker, the alleged comments were wrong, they were racist, and he has now, as I said, the comments were wrong, they were racist. He has rightly apologised for them, and that remorse and that remorse should be accepted, Mr. Speaker. There is no place for racism in Britain, and the government that I lead is living proof of that.
Mr. Speaker, the man bankrolling the Prime Minister also said that the member for Hackney North should be shot. How low would he have to sink? What racist, woman-hating threat of violence would he have to make before the Prime Minister plucked up the courage to hand back the £10 million that he's taken from him?
Mr. Speaker, as I said, the gentleman apologised genuinely for his comments, and that remorse should be accepted. But he talks about language. He might want to reflect on the double standards of his deputy leader, calling her opponents scum, Mr. Speaker. His shadow foreign secretary comparing Conservatives to Nazis, Mr. Speaker.
Sunak there conflating being a Tory with being someone with a protected characteristic. Let's take a look at some more of that exchange.
When the man bankrolling his election says the member for Hackney North should be shot, he suddenly finds himself tongue-tied, shrinking in sophistry, hoping he can deflect for long enough that we'll all go away. What does the Prime Minister think it was about the hundreds of millions of pounds of NHS contracts given to Frank Hester by his government that first attracted him to giving £10 million to the Tory party in the first place?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'm absolutely not going to take any lectures from somebody who chose to represent an anti-Semitic terrorist group, Hizb ut-Tahrir, who chose to serve a leader who let anti-Semitism run rife in this Labour Party. Those are his actions, those are his values, and that's how he should be judged.
Mr. Speaker, the problem is he's describing a Labour Party that no longer exists. I'm describing the man who is bankrolling their upcoming general election.
Helena, is being a Tory a protected characteristic?
I mean, you'd almost think that it was, given the kind of media discussion around the Conservative Party and the way they framed these debates for so long about whether or not there is an inherent level of racism within the Conservative Party, or even noticing when any of the people within the Conservative Party stray into racist territory in any of the things that they do or the things that they say. And the fact that they seem to be only acting on the Conservative Party now seems to be a big part of the kind of media, this kind of great noticing. It's been kind of noticing, oh, really? Oh, the Conservative Party is full of really unscrupulous individuals, both in terms of the people who donate to them and the people who are MPs and party members. Wow, I can't believe they've only noticed this stuff now, because really and truly, this is all kind of thin end of the wedge when it comes to the history of the Conservative Party's kind of racist ties to a bunch of these kind of things and the rhetoric that they say. When you think about the history, all the way from the Enoch Powells of the past to the kind of alt-right rhetoric that you hear out of Conservative Party members today, those, all this talk of cultural Marxism and the Great Replacement, which is kind of the mainstays of conservative thought right now, both inside the party and outside of it. You'd think why these things don't get any coverage until now, because they really do need to be properly exposed. This idea that the nasty party went away under David Cameron just magically returned now. And there's always been there. There's always been the people. And certain members of the Conservative Party, I don't recognise the party that I see now. Really, I don't know what they've been paying attention to for the past 20 years or so. And then we also see it from an institutional level. Remember when there was supposed to be this EHRC report into the Conservative Party's innate Islamophobia that we've seen just shown to everybody over the course of the last few months? Yet that one got dumped. It never happened, the Islamophobia investigation into the Conservative Party from the HRC, which they had control of at the time. Weird how that happened. Didn't happen. And on top of that as well, there's been all this deliberation of whether even calling some of these comments racist. Remember when they refused to even call what Lee Anderson said Islamophobic? And now it took 48 hours of non-stop media coverage let's make it very clear what was said here. Someone saying that seeing Diane Abbott made him want to hate all black women, clear misogynoir to anybody paying attention, and also saying that she should be shot. This is beyond the pale. And the fact that it took 48 hours for Rishi Sunak even to say it was racist just shows you how innate those feelings are, how reticent they are to criticise their own ranks, or indeed it is for the media to criticise them as well.
You say that this whole idea that the Tory, the nasty party reputation, David Cameron really wanted to work on shedding that reputation. And I feel like, when it comes to actual policy, austerity was deeply nasty. I don't think that David Cameron, beyond any kind of cosmetic way, actually shed the reputation of being the nasty party that the Conservatives have. What I see now in this iteration of the Conservative Party is a relishing in that nastiness and seeing that nastiness as not only a kind of badge of honor, but very perversely as if it's a way of speaking truth to power, that being nasty to black women, being nasty to trans people, being nasty to migrants is somehow speaking truth to power, which is, of course, so funny. It's not funny, it's devastating, but it's so unbelievably manipulative, because it's like, you guys are power. And this perverse way where they manage to say that ethnic minorities, undocumented migrants, trans people, queer people somehow harbor this power. And it is in fact the bigoted, the Conservatives and people who express bigoted opinions that are the renegades in that context. It's one of the great inversions, I hate to use this phrase, but Orwellian inversions that we see in public discourse in Britain today. And I feel like this kind of debacle really is showing that. Right, on to the rest of the story. So during PMQs, while many MPs and party leaders spoke about her, Diane Abbott repeatedly stood up, trying to catch the speaker's eye to ask a question. Obviously, it's a conversation about her. Why wouldn't she? And she was ignored each time. And it's prompted widespread criticism of the speaker's conduct. So Lindsay Hoyle's office has issued this defense of the decision. During Prime Minister's questions, the Speaker must select MPs from either side of the House on an alternating basis for fairness. This takes place within a limited time frame, with the chair prioritising members who are already listed on the order paper. This week, as is often the case, there was not enough time to call all members who wanted to ask a question. Diane Abbott responded by saying this: "I don't know whose interests the Speaker thinks he is serving, but it is not the interests of the Commons or democracy." Following PMQs, Labour leader Keir Starmer spoke to Diane Abbott, and Owen Jones reports this. Keir Starmer approached Diane Abbott. Conversation overheard went like this. Keir Starmer says, "Let me know if there's anything I can do." Diane Abbott says, "You could restore the whip." Keir goes, "I understand, just let me know if there's anything." Diane says, "Restore the whip." Keir Starmer, "I understand." That account has now been confirmed by Diane Abbott herself. The Huffington Post report that there are still no plans to return the Labour whip to her. Abbott was suspended last year after she said that, quote, "white-seeming minorities are subject to prejudice rather than racism." Labour's Steve Reed was asked about that decision on BBC Politics Live.
Has the Labour Party been too tough on Diane Abbott?
No, there was a complaint made and there was an independent investigation into that complaint, and it should continue. It's right that it should, but there's no connect. I mean, whether you do or don't agree with
I'm just
Diane's
asking,
politics,
though, about because
nobody should be subject to the kind of abuse that she's been subject to.
Of course not, but what I'm asking you is that Harriet Harman and Ed Balls and now on our programme, Sarah Champion, Labour MP, all saying it is time that she was readmitted to the Labour Party. Should she be?
Well, part of the Labour Party dealing with the extremism that we used to have in our party was in setting up an independent complaints process without political interference, and that is the right thing to do. The Conservatives are not tackling the extremism in their party if they're prepared to take £10 million from somebody who calls for an MP to be shot because she's a black woman.
Right. I mean, Harriet Harman, just to return to this issue, she said last night, "I don't like to second-guess Labour's complaints procedures, but I would be very sad if Diane Abbott were to leave Parliament not as a member of the Labour Party. I'd like to see it resolved, and I hope it can be resolved in a way, as I said, which has Diane Abbott back in the party." Now, just on resolving it, shouldn't that have been done by now? It's been about 11 months, I think.
Well, I sympathise with that, and I'd like this to be resolved quickly for everybody's sake. I mean, whether you do or don't agree with Diane Abbott, she is a trailblazer. She was the first black woman MP in our country. She's put up with incredible abuse because of who she is, not because of what her political views are. Nobody should be subject to that. But the process needs to go through all the stages that it needs to go through.
But why is it taking so long? Sarah Champion said it's gone on far too long.
I do very much hope that this can be resolved quickly, but this is not. This is a separate issue from the abuse that Diane is being subject to by this Conservative donor.
Quite something to see the Labour Party taking a moral high ground over on the question of anti-black racism being against MPs when they still haven't actually done anything about the Ford report, which showed that there was a hierarchy of racism, and anti-black racism and Islamophobia in the Labour Party are not taken seriously. So that's quite something to watch. Helena, what do you think of not only the Speaker's handling of this, but also how Starmer and the Labour front bench is playing this right now?
So with regards to the Speaker, whilst I absolutely believe that he 100% should have given Diane Abbott the space to ask a question at PMQs, and the excuse of them having run out of time is completely nonsensical because PMQs can go on as long as the Speaker wants it to. Bercow was famous for having PMQs last up to an hour sometimes, so if there was extra questions that needed asking, he absolutely should have made the time for it, given the discussion, given the kind of people who were speaking about her, but without her own personal input. One can only assume that she was making a statement on these specific statements that were made, or the allegations that were made about this Conservative Party donor. But I do understand at least why he didn't do it, given that the last time he was in the news, it was very specifically for going outside of Commons precedent. And so if he personally thought that it might be seen as being outside of precedent, he could face those similar allegations. So I can understand the invidious position, but he 100% should have made space for it. And I will obviously completely say personally that I believe that he should. As for the Labour Party, it is absolutely incredible to me, given that the whip was essentially taken away from her without any kind of oversight of that process. They say, oh, well, we're waiting for this process to continue. Or 11 months is what it takes to investigate whether Diane Abbott should be allowed to stand at the next election as a Labour Party MP, or have the whip restored to her. At any rate, one can only assume that they tried to leave this going out as long as possible so that a snap election be called while she was still suspended, so they were able to put someone else in her place. And at this same time, as essentially throwing all due process out the window, as she explained in her letter that she wrote, her open letter that she wrote about her unfair treatment within the Labour Party, then using her specifically in the legacy that she stands for as the first black woman elected to Parliament as some kind of using it as a weapon to attack the Conservative Party, whilst all of the history of what she faced when she was Shadow Home Secretary is being completely brushed under the carpet. We already know from the messages that were seen during the internal inquiries within the Labour Party about the kind of abuse that she had from her own Labour Party colleagues, no less, to the point of being reduced to crying in the toilets in one exchange that was leaked. There clearly is just no respect being shown to her personally, especially given that they are using her legacy without actually giving her the due process that she is quite frankly deserved, given how much she's put into the Labour Party for however many long years that she has been an MP. And on top of that, you mentioned the Ford report very specifically. There was a report on Channel 4 about the treatment of black women within the Labour Party. Multiple black female MPs spoke to Channel 4 about their treatment within the Labour Party under the hierarchy of racism, as you rightly describe, that was laid out within the Ford report. And they specifically said that they were scared to put their names to their statements they gave to Channel 4 because they were also afraid of losing the whip as well. Now, if that doesn't show you about the kind of two sides of the treatment of black women within the Labour Party that we see currently, I don't know what else is a more excellent descriptor of that.
Yeah, I think the way you phrase it, Helena, is weaponizing her legacy and sort of using her in this moment in order to kind of win a temporary media war with the Tories, to win one over on the Tories on frankly quite suspicious grounds. There's something it's just tokenism, right? And this is what happens when you, as particularly a black woman, but also as a person of color, entering in institutions that have institutional racism issues, you can only enter those institutions and survive those institutions if you agree to be a silent and docile, basically just body without a voice or a mind. And the minute that you start to have your own agency and to have your own kind of vision of how things should go, you get eliminated or you get pushed out. And those institutions that claim to have hired you because or to have brought you in the fold because they want to be seen as progressive will then have no problem using racism, Islamophobia, homophobia, whatever it is, to basically push you out or to whip up hatred against you. And it just goes to show that you can't go in, the message that the Labour Party are giving is that you don't get to come in here and survive if you want to change things here. You can only survive here if you are willing to be changed by us. And Diane Abbott has refused to change. Diane Abbott has stuck to her conviction. And look, we can get into the contents of that letter. I don't think that it was a very accurate analysis of how whiteness works. But the point is the disproportionate visibility and surveillance and punishment that Black women receive in the Labour Party is unquestionable. And there's something extremely disgusting about the Labour Party using this story and tokenizing her legacy when actually they have refused at every point in recent years to protect her from the misogynoir, from the racialized surveillance that she receives, and also has refused to do the same for other Black women in the Labour Party. So whilst it is correct that the Conservative Party are getting this level of scrutiny, I do think it is very important to point out that anti-Black racism and Islamophobia is a shared issue. It is a party unity issue across both the Conservatives and the Labour Party. And every investigation and every kind of story that we hear from not only from individuals within these parties, but actually baked into their policy is that very message. We keep hearing that the Tories have run out of ideas. If only that was the case. Instead, they seem to just have unlimited bad ones. The Times reports that ministers plan to pay £3,000 to failed asylum seekers if they'll agree they'll move to Rwanda. The scheme is separate from the Rwanda deportation scheme, which has been repeatedly stalled by the courts. Under this new proposed plan, people who have their asylum claim rejected, but who also can't return to their home countries, will be eligible. At the moment, those who fail to gain asylum can receive financial assistance to return to their country of origin, but the new scheme is the first of its kind to offer repatriation to a totally new country in exchange for possible Rwandan citizenship and resettlement funds. Despite the Supreme Court ruling that Rwanda is not a safe country, ministers are confident that the new scheme is legal, as removal will be, quote, voluntary. Speaking to ITV, Business Minister Kevin Hollinrake explained the government's reasoning.
We already do pay failed asylum seekers money if they're willing to go back to their home country. And that's what we already do. There's a voluntary scheme along those lines. What we're considering doing is doing that for Rwanda as well. But £3,000, it's a lot of money, but it's a small price to pay when you compare it to other costs of keeping somebody in the UK who is here illegally or is here because they've claimed asylum wrongly. So I think it's right, that we do return failed asylum seekers back to their country of origin. Sometimes you can't do that, and that's why we're considering something similar for Rwanda.
Shadow Immigration Minister Stephen Kinnock said this about the proposal. We know from the treaty that capacity in Rwanda is very limited, so ministers should now explain what this new idea means for the scheme as it was originally conceived. And they should also make clear how many people they expect to send on this basis and what the cost will be. There have been so many confused briefings around the Rwanda policy that the public will be forgiven for treating this latest wheeze with a degree of scepticism. Classic Labour, disagreeing with the policy on the basis of procedure and technicality rather than morality. But could the real plan here be to find a legal route to deport people to Rwanda and then pressurize vulnerable people into accepting it? Well, there are already reports that this is what is happening. Brian Dykoff of Migrants Organise has said this. Apparently, Home Office has started calling refused asylum seekers to ask if they would be interested in going to Rwanda. I wondered if someone could make a short explainer to communities to say that this is completely voluntary. And migration expert Lou Calvi said this in response. Hearing this too, anyone supporting people being contacted by the government and offered cash to go to Rwanda, tell them it's voluntary. They'd have to withdraw all outstanding appeal rights and likely have a re-entry ban. They shouldn't sign a thing without independent advice. So it basically seems there that they've gotten repeated pushback in the courts for the Rwanda policy. And so they found this little loophole to say, well, if it's voluntary, then it's not illegal. And so we're going to basically create a system where we can possibly coerce very vulnerable people into taking voluntary action to go to Rwanda. Helena, what do you think of this latest repackaging of this horrific and unworkable migration policy?
So let's in the abstract, right? Let's imagine that we're not under this kind of conservative government and we're under a far more reasonable government. And it was entirely voluntary. There was no pressure going on here. I could understand why this would be something that they would float. This idea, well, if you failed your asylum claim, like I, in my opinion, the current asylum process is far too draconian, and that we should be more accepting of people on kind of claims that could go either here nor there. But nevertheless, there will be a certain number of people whose asylum claim will fail, and they'll be shown to not be under a sufficient level of persecution to reach asylum. If they have an entirely free choice and option to be able to not go back to their country of origin, if they still feel persecution and go to somewhere that, whilst not being safe, is at least better, then they can always have that option. And I wouldn't necessarily mind, because then if you think someone's an economic migrant rather than an actual refugee or an asylum seeker, then they would just want to go back to their country of origin anyway. So I can, in an incredibly abstract sense, see where they would theoretically be coming from. I just, as you say, have no trust in this conservative government whatsoever in not using this as a very deliberate tactic to coerce people into going. And there's two reasons they would want to kind of coerce people into going specifically with these kind of threats. First of all, is the financial element. They're one of the biggest kind of optical failures of the Rwanda plan from the Conservative Party's perspective is the cost of it all. People always look at it and go, we're spending hundreds of millions of pounds. Nothing's happening. No one's going anywhere. It's a big gimmick, as the Labour Party would call it. Why on earth are we spending all this money? So they say, well, we'll pay people far less and we'll just get them off to Rwanda and they can voluntarily sign up to it, quote unquote voluntary. And second of all, I think they're just doing it for optics. One of the big things, of course, we literally had Rishi Sunak making a bet with Piers Morgan that they were going to get flights off the ground for people going to Rwanda. And if they can muddy the waters, well, actually, we really mean say, well, it has to be people who we are forcing to go there because they've arrived via irregular means or whatever it is. But as long as they're getting somebody off to Rwanda, whether it by under this kind of this voluntary, this facade of it being voluntary, and in this particular instance, then they get to claim a sort of Pyrrhic victory. This victory is, well, we finally got somebody to Rwanda. Well, we had to offer them £3,000. We had to give it completely up to them rather than being foisted upon them. But at the very least, we've managed to get those flights off, and they can claim it as some political win in the optics war within this current migration crisis that kind of grips 20% of the electorate or so. So I think that's the main reason why they're doing this. But again, I want to stress that I have no confidence in this current government that they will do this anything other than the most cruelest way possible.
Yeah, I think, you saying that what they want to do is basically just have a flight with asylum seekers who have not been given asylum to stay in this country, or who are not, basically people who have applied for asylum and are now on a plane to Rwanda. That is the purpose. I think you're totally right. And increasingly, I'm beginning to realize that with the Conservatives at least, and likely also for Labour, the way that they construct policy is not about, we want to achieve these goals in society or in the economy or in whatever, and this is how we get there. These are the policies that we take to get there. It's instead, what's the headline that we want? And then let's reverse engineer whatever kinds of actions or policies can get us to that headline. And so what you have is, even if what your value is that you don't want, migration in this country. Obviously, it's a delusional and unhinged value, but Say that is what your value is. None of this is actually going to get you to that place. It's not a workable policy. It's at the moment, the Rwanda deportation scheme seems to be not legal. It violates law, international law. It violates European law, and it even violates local law here. And also the actual practicalities of it, the capacities of the Rwanda scheme, the practicalities of it actually having a serious effect on migration numbers or the numbers of asylum seekers that are accepted into this country is minimal. But the point is, the headline is, we are sending vulnerable people to detention centers in Rwanda. And whatever way that they can get to that headline is what the priority of the government is. And that's just not serious governance. It's not serious policymaking. But unfortunately, it feels like that is what the politics of this country is currently being governed by. Kath Viner became editor-in-chief of The Guardian in 2015. Once hailed as a leftist firebrand who held the Palestinian cause close to her heart, many of her colleagues voted for her to be editor in the hope that she'd return The Guardian to its progressive, left-liberal roots. But Viner hasn't lived up to that promise. In an article on NovaraMedia.com, Rivka Brown details how, since October 7th, Viner's fear of right-wing pro-Israel lobby has resulted in the censorship of dissenting voices at the paper. 23 years ago, Kath Viner wrote this in a Guardian column. The Palestinians have always known that they are the racial underclass, but the overwhelmingly unequal nature of the conflict is so often left out of the peace equation. This is a modern conflict over land between an occupier and a subject people. The occupation, long accepted as illegal by the United Nations, between a state with all the cards, a hugely powerful army, the support of the world's only superpower, control of electricity, water, most of the land, and a population with none. It is not a war between equals, and it is overwhelmingly Palestinians who are being killed. 3 years later, in 2003, an American peace activist was killed in the Gaza Strip. Rachel Corrie was protesting the destruction of Palestinian houses in Rafah when she was crushed to death by an Israeli bulldozer. Writing about her in 2005, Viner described Corrie as, quote, neither saint nor traitor, both serious and funny, messy and talented, devastatingly prescient and human and whole. With the actor Alan Rickman, Viner edited Corrie's writings and turned them into a well-reviewed play. When she became editor in 2015, Viner's CV suggested The Guardian might begin to reflect her earlier commitment to the Palestinian cause. But since Israel began its genocidal assault on the Gaza Strip, that commitment is nowhere to be seen. One longtime Guardian staffer gave Novara Media this explanation. I think that the editorial leadership has become more cautious and to some degree more gun-shy. I think that's partly because the pro-Israel lobby is more aggressive in the UK than it used to be, and forthright. And partly it's a legacy of the Corbyn anti-Semitism issue. I think it also reflects, at times, a lack of confidence in aspects of the leadership. That caution is reflected in Viner's attempts to appease right-wing and pro-Israel detractors. One of her colleagues told Novara that, quote, Kath takes the Board of Deputies very seriously and reads the shit out of right-wing press, end quote. The Board of Deputies of British Jews are the self-appointed representatives of the Jewish community in Britain and a source of significant pro-Israel lobbying. As editor-in-chief, Viner has significant oversight over The Guardian's global opinion output, but since October 7th, staff report that she has increasingly centralized control, reportedly demanding that all columns about Palestine or Israel are sent to her for final sign-off. And Viner's caution appears to have resulted in a both sides editorial stance at the paper. Another staff member told Novara this. We do as many good opinion pieces as we ever have about Palestine, but at the same time, if we're taking 2 steps forward, we're then always taking 1 step back. It comes to a point where every time we put out a really good piece, I'm 100% certain that within a week, management will get spooked, and through some mechanism, another piece will arise that is the other side of that. You can just play mix and match on the Guardian website. That both sides attitude was starkly illustrated last October after Israeli historian Ras Segal published this piece in The Guardian. The piece argued that Israel weaponized the Holocaust to justify Israeli mass violence against Palestinians. That article resulted in this rebuke from the Board of Deputies. The Guardian's decision to publish an opinion piece entitled "Israel Must Stop Weaponizing the Holocaust" was unbelievably crass. The article's failure, for example, to acknowledge the decades-long comparison of Israel to the Nazis, including in Hamas's genocidal founding charter, sums up the astonishing lack of judgment exhibited. Its publication marks a new low for the paper. Days later, Viner's Guardian published a response piece by Catherine Pollock, head of the Holocaust Educational Trust and a powerful pro-Israel voice in the media. In it, she referenced several Israeli government talking points, including that Hamas fighters, quote, murdered and mutilated babies. That claim has now been widely discredited, including by the Guardian's own Jerusalem correspondent, Bethan McKernan, but not before it was used to drum up support for Israel's slaughter of Palestinian civilians in Gaza. Staff with knowledge of the issue strongly suspect Pollock's article originated through Viner, and it was certainly sent to her for sign-off. Viner's fear of criticism has also led to the silencing of her own journalists. In November, the Jewish News published this opinion piece. The anonymous author claimed that the Guardian's coverage of the war, as well as colleagues' comments, made them feel unsafe at work. In it, the author says, quote, "Back at work, I see someone pointing to a photo of the Israeli flag burning in the newspaper. They laugh. This is my favorite picture." That line, however, was misleading. Rivka Brown writes this. The Jewish News subsequently issued a correction to the piece, adding that the perpetrator was not a staff member, but a visiting schoolchild. The author subsequently revealed to be Jane Princely, later quit as the Guardian's education officer, a role that includes managing visits from school groups, to work as a reporter at the hard-right pro-Israel Jewish Chronicle. So the piece in the Jewish News was poorly fact-checked. And yet it led to Viner silencing one of the Guardian's most prominent Black voices. Shante Joseph is host of the Guardian's pop culture podcast, included among the paper's best podcasts of the week just weeks before October 7th. But after the Princely article, Joseph became the focus of a number of pieces in the Jewish News, and Rivka Brown has the details here. Joseph, the Jewish News alleged, had retweeted an X/Twitter account deemed to be pro-Hamas for its inclusion of a paraglider emoji in its handle. Joseph removed the offending posts and issued an apology, but it was too late. Viner paused Joseph's podcast and hasn't returned it since. A Guardian spokesperson confirmed that Shante Joseph is the presenter of the Pop Culture podcast, which is currently taking a break. Joseph wasn't the only journalist suppressed by Viner's fear of controversy. Staff see signs of this in the paper's decision to spike, with not a hint of irony, an opinion piece by lawyer Dylan Serber about the censorship of pro-Palestine solidarity, which he later published in N+1 magazine. At the time, a spokesperson for the Guardian US told the Daily Beast that Serber's piece had failed to meet the outlet's high standards. Serber suspected he'd been caught up in the same new McCarthyist purge he'd identified. When Serber, who has both Jewish and Palestinian heritage, called the opinion editor, Amana Fontella Khan, asking that she explain the 11th hour decision, she blamed, quote, "an editor above my head." Multiple Guardian journalists told Novara Media Viner was responsible. Viner declined to comment. Other writers have also been affected, including regular columnist Owen Jones, whose journalism on Palestine was not published for 6 weeks last year. Responding to a request for comment, The Guardian said this. The Guardian's extensive reporting since October 7th has been driven by our journalists working on the ground across the Middle East, most of whom have deep experience of the region. Their expertise has provided our readers with coverage of unrivaled rigor and depth, highlighting the human cost above all. Our opinion section has featured a wide range of perspectives, including more progressive voices than any other mainstream news organization, whilst The Guardian's editorial leader line has been consistently clear in condemning the appalling violence and calling for an immediate ceasefire and the release of the hostages. Despite that wide range of perspectives, some workers at The Guardian feel the paper, under Viner's leadership, has missed its moment. One gave Novara Media this assessment of the editor-in-chief. Is she a passionate Zionist? Of course she isn't. It's that she's sacrificing her convictions because she hates being criticised. If there's one big moment for The Guardian to say, this is why we're here, this is it. And Kath is letting it pass us by. Helena, is this just reflective of one woman's decisions, or is there this broad trend kind of happening across the media and culture space? What do you think is going on here?
I think the comments made before from the article that you quoted, specifically about a kind of new McCarthyism, very, very on point, and I 100% agree. And it's not just us here on the left in our little echo chamber who are noticing this kind of McCarthyism that's happening around pro-Palestinian voices, or those critical of the actions of the state of Israel, not just now, but in of the historic malfeasance of the state of Israel. Robert Peston himself even stated very specifically that he thinks that there's kind of an insidious McCarthyism happening around those conflating criticism with the state of Israel as being anti-Semitic. Right? We've all seen this. We're all very aware of this on our side of the discussion, and we've seen so many instances of this happening where certain people have had to defend themselves. I mean, look at the comments about the Oscars yesterday, the acceptance speech. It's really truly the thin end of the wedge around the way in which our media discourse is being shaped by those who will criticize those who make statements about the actions of the state of Israel and then use the accusation of anti-Semitism as a way of ensuring that only one kind of narrative is ever talked about with regards to the Israel-Palestine conflict. And we all saw this under the Corbyn era of the Labour Party, in which genuine and legitimate criticism of the state of Israel was this huge discussion that was had about whether or not we could even, whether or not it was anti-Semitic in the first place. We had constantly had to defend ourselves. And in the wake of what's happened on October the 7th and the kind of scenes that people saw on October the 7th, well, except let's be real, the things that were done on that day were things that shock loads of different people, but they can be used again as a way of shutting the door on these kind of conversations that we should be having all across the media. It's not just The Guardian that have taken flack for the way in which they frame this discussion. The fact that part of BBC's impartiality commitments is they don't describe Hamas as a terrorist organization. And the amount of kind of hatred and bile that they have been put under for not taking a specific point of view on this discussion rather than being committed to impartiality is just shown the way in which only one narrative is allowed to be spoken of with regards to the conflict going on at the moment. I think another thing is important here as well. So during the Brexit debates in 2016, Emily Maitlis, when she was on the BBC, she talked about this idea of manufactured balance. This idea, well, we can't just have somebody come on and give the opinion on something being a statement of fact or not, about something being historical record or an economic reality. What we have to do is then also bring on the other side of the discussion and create a debate out of something where we could otherwise just be having a single individual or a single group or a single perspective on this being done and being shown as being objective, by only treating it with due objectivity rather than creating a subjective discussion of both sides of some kind of issue. And that's what we're seeing right now at the moment, especially when you look at the Guardian articles having to be posted essentially one by the other, like the one in, one out rule, that you can't just have a position where you say, well, we're going to be taking a Palestinian approach or a pro-Palestine approach to this issue because there's kind of the moral position that occupation is wrong, for example. And on what you get from that, what you get from this kind of this manufactured balance is this idea that, well, that somehow there's equivacy here. There's equivalence between the actions of a rogue colonial ethno-state imposing occupation on a group of people who have had no choice on the matter, and then resistance forces committing war crimes whilst engaging in resistance, for example. And this has really done a dangerous precedent to set where pro-Israel, pro-Western foreign policy elements of our media can essentially force other sections of the media to try and take a balanced line. Like, would you expect the Telegraph or the Times, for example, to take a both sides approach to this? You never expect it, but somehow it's expected of pro-Palestine and left-wing, quote-unquote, media in this country.
And I also think that, Mona Chalabi did a very good, she's a data journalist, and she did this amazing Instagram reel where she basically showed how Palestinian voices and pro-Palestinian voices, I mean, Palestinian voices are almost absent completely in our media, but even pro-Palestinian voices are systematically sidelined in newsrooms, are systematically not taken as credible, are not taken as legitimate news sources or journalists or voices on this issue. And that's, again, where this issue of when do questions like both sides and neutrality and objectivity get mobilized? It's rarely mobilized in order to get more pro-Palestine or Palestinian voices in the conversation, because we know that they are systematically deprioritized and sidelined in mainstream newsrooms. Of course, if you want to read more about this amazing story, it's a really long, good investigation that you can really get your teeth into. You can check out Rivka Brown's report, which is up on novaramedia.com. The link is in the description. And also in the description is a link to sign up to our newsletter, The Pick, which will curate all of the best articles from Novara and send it straight to your inbox. So you can sign up to that by clicking in the link below. Before we go on to our next story, I just want to offer a warning that it contains footage and themes that some may find distressing. So continue with your own well-being in mind. In the occupied West Bank, Palestinians are facing growing violence from armed Israeli settlers, the IDF, and the Israeli police. Since October 7th, over 400 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank, an area of the Palestinian territories not under Hamas control, and more than 100 of them have been children. And on Tuesday, one more child was added to that list in East Jerusalem. That was Rami Hamdan, a 13-year-old boy shot dead by an Israeli border police officer for throwing a firework. According to witnesses, the fireworks were not even aimed at the officers and posed no threat to them. So we have an unarmed child shot dead by a heavily armed officer of the Israeli state. To most people, that's a grotesque atrocity. But to some in Israel's government, it's an act of heroism. After the killing, Israel's security minister Itamar Ben-Gvir said this: "I support the border guard fighters who are operating at this time and are risking their lives now against dozens of Arab rioters in Shafat. I salute the soldier who killed the terrorist who tried to shoot fireworks at him and the troops. This is exactly how you should act against terrorists, with determination and precision." The police officer suspected of carrying out the shooting has been arrested. On Wednesday morning, Ben-Gvir doubled down, visiting the jail where the officer is being held, and called the investigation, quote, "shameful and a scandal." Ben-Gvir also called the officer, quote, "a hero," and said that he, quote, "together with his friends did an exemplary job." Those remarks have earned the minister a rebuke from Israel's Attorney General. In a letter to Ben-Gvir entitled "Wrongful Influence on Investigation," the Attorney General writes this: "Criminal investigations, including of police officers, are carried out with absolute independence by investigating bodies, including Department of Internal Police Investigations entities. Any interference by you in criminal investigations, whether directly or indirectly, is a flagrant violation of the law, severely undermines the rule of law, politicizes law enforcement systems, and is prohibited influence on them." But Ben-Gvir's history of congratulating Israelis who've killed unarmed Palestinians suggests those words won't make any difference. In 2022, Ben-Gvir called an Israeli soldier who executed a 22-year-old unarmed Palestinian a hero. Amar Mefla was shot at point-blank range in the West Bank, an act Ben-Gvir described as, quote, "precise, swift, and rigorous." In August last year, Ben-Gvir also called two settlers heroes after they shot a 19-year-old Palestinian boy through the neck while he was cooking. Ben-Gvir added, quote, "anyone who defends himself from stone throwing should receive a commendation." And Ben-Gvir has also praised this man. Baruch Goldstein was an Israeli mass murderer who killed 29 Palestinians praying in Hebron's Ibrahimi Mosque during Ramadan in 1994. Several of those killed were children, and a further 125 people were injured. Ben-Gvir has described Goldstein as, quote, "my hero," and previously hung a photo of him in his living room. I don't think we can expect an apology anytime soon. The story of a Tory donor allegedly making racist comments about Diane Abbott has been dominating headlines. On BBC Newsnight, 2 prominent black Tories were invited to comment. First up was Siobhan Aarons, chair of the Tory Reform Group and co-founder of Conservatives Against Racism for Equality. She was asked why it took the Tories 24 hours to condemn the comments.
24 hours for a story that was 5 years old. It's old news, and yet they're making it new news. And that is really frustrating. I think it's really frustrating for every single Conservative activist from a BAME background. And it's really frustrating as a black woman to become news because of a white man. Whereas instead, we should be focusing on the amazing successes of people like Diane Abbott, who broke glass ceilings for us, regardless of our politics or if we're doing something else, but to actually be able to look at women like her, British black women, and shout about their successes rather than only becoming news because of a white man. I'm over it. Let's move on.
That was like Cirque du Soleil in terms of like mental acrobatics to come up with an answer that isn't, wow, my party are really screwed up on this question. Like, it's really screwed up that the party that I am defending willingly accepts millions of pounds of donations from people who speak about black women like that. And maybe there's some kind of relationship between the politics of my party and the fact that men like that want that party to win and want to see that party succeed. Maybe it's because they actually both think the same thing about black women. But no, of course, we're going to turn this into, why are we making news because of a white man? I mean, it's because Diane Abbott is trying to make us aware of the fact that the party in government is willingly co-signing this kind of politics, and that has an effect on all black women in the country. It's not doesn't just have an effect on Diane Abbott. It has effect on all black women in this country who see that and take a very clear message about what the governing party thinks of them. Right. Going back onto that clip, it was the first time I'd seen that clip, so you got my passionate reaction to it. Newsnight also had on Wilfred Emmanuel Jones, a former Tory candidate who co-founded a group trying to help the party engage with black voters. Let's see what he says.
This is a successful attempt of the left to weaponize race, because what it's done is left a real bad feeling amongst a lot of black people thinking the Conservative Party is not for them. And so people like us, who are proud Conservatives, have a harder job to do because they weaponize this using race.
They might push back on the weaponizing accusation.
Who will push back?
The left.
Well, they are weaponising.
The only reason this is a story is because Frank Hester said this
5 years ago. If you said it today, they understand us having this debate. The climate was very different 5 years ago.
Was it?
Oh, but very, very much so.
They're talking about this as if this is some distant past that the Conservatives have left behind. Look, they have still accepted money from this man. $1 million in the past year they've accepted. 10 million in the past year they've accepted, that they and have gone on to say, they've had spokespeople on the media saying, if this man wanted to offer us another 10 million tomorrow, we would take it. They are doubling down. So the idea that this is some far gone past, a whole 5 years ago, is absurd. The whole point is that this is it wouldn't resonate so much if people didn't feel like it was reflective of the Conservative Party's politics. And the only thing that I would disagree with here is that I don't think that the Labour Party have treated Diane Abbott particularly any better, at least this iteration of the Labour Party. That's the only thing that, if I was a black Conservative trying to kind of defend that on Newsnight, that's probably what I would go for rather than doing whatever happened over there. Let's continue and finish off this car crash of a Newsnight interview.
I do not want to come on here and actually defend him, because everybody would accept that actually it was racist what it says.
Let me ask you about how Number 10 have handled it.
Well, you know, number 10, basically, they handled it very badly because, as you said, they'd actually stepped on it. But when it comes to race, people are really, really terrified about what is the correct language to use. So is it about somebody saying something racist? Does that then imply that they're racist? And this is one of the problems we have in this country about people are really terrified of what is the right language to use.
I understand that. Let me read you the full quote again. This is what Frank Hester is alleged to have said about Diane Abbott. It's like trying not to be racist, but you see Diane Abbott on the TV and you're just like, you just want to hate all black women because she's there. And I don't hate all black women at all, but I think she should be shot. It's not difficult to describe that as racist.
Nobody's saying that isn't racist. I'm saying those are racist. But
you're saying people are scared to say it.
No. What I'm not. People are not scared to say that somebody has said something racist. It's when you then accuse somebody saying something is racist that person is therefore racist. I give you an example of that. I've been in front of people who have been out canvassing for me, and they've used the word, I don't know if you can say to the neighbour before people are getting upset about it, but they've used phrases like nigger in the woodpile. Now, somebody might accuse that person of being racist. That person isn't racist. They're using the incorrect language. And I think we have to get down to a point of when is it that somebody's used the incorrect language and when is it that somebody's racist? And I think those are two different things. And this is why we're all dancing around the edges here. No one's accusing...
And don't hate me, but I am going to apologise on your behalf for using the M-word, because some people will be offended.
Well, that's fine, but
I'm not dancing around that.
I know that every producer took in a big, it was just like, held their breath when he went, now I don't know if you're allowed to say this. Everyone was like, don't say it. I think it's very interesting because what comes across there is, he's saying that just because someone uses racist language doesn't mean that they are racist. Now, first of all, this is a symptom of a problem that we have where saying that someone is racist or saying that something is racist is seen as some kind of moral insult, or it's seen as some kind of like personal moral failing. Now, obviously, it's understandable why people see that this way, but we also need to understand that we live in a racist society. We live in a society where the economy, public space, public infrastructure, representation, culture is racialized and organizes people into, racial ways of thinking. And therefore, it would be very strange for all of the individuals within that to somehow be completely immune from internalizing any of that. And so this idea of you can use racist language, but that doesn't mean that you're racist. It brings it down to this question of what is an individual person's intention or moral purity, when really what we should be talking about is what is the effects of the fact that our society is like this? What are the effects of the fact that the party and government, a man who speaks like that in such a degrading and dehumanizing way about Black women and who takes, someone he disagrees with and makes it into this kind of racist, vitriolic feeling and statement. What does it mean that our party and government, that he feels so aligned with our party and government that he is handing over £10 million to them, and that party is happy to accept it, not only back then, but would be happy to accept it in the future? It tells us that there is an alignment of values, and we're not just talking about language here. We see it in the kind of world, the kind of country that the Conservatives have created, that kind of ideology is reflected in there. So it's not just about language, and it's very convenient to kind of make this a conversation about the wrong words and the right words, or to make it a conversation about someone's individual moral purity. This is about what are the effects of this politics that we are seeing every day on a structural level, on an institutional level, on the lives of Black people and ethnic minorities in this country. The evidence is clear. So let's see again where things go next. We've got still getting more out of this Newsnight appearance. Let's see that final clip.
Why do you think it is seemingly difficult for number 10 to say this was racist?
I don't know. And I think that's the hardest thing, right? Thank you for inviting me here tonight to be able to talk about these things. But I can't answer for number 10. Number 10 needs to answer for number 10. I can only represent myself, my community, and do so in a positive way. And I am tired of talking about these things and these people. And that's the only time I have an opportunity to talk about, successful or just ordinary, being successful by being ordinary British Black women. So I don't want to talk about that. I know we have to face it. I'm not trying to not face it, but I actually want to be able to celebrate. This is the month of International Women's Day, and make it the whole month. We've just had Mothering Sunday. If we piggyback on the US having their Black History Month last month, for example, why is it that I am here talking about Hester and Number 10 when we have so many British Black women that we should be celebrating?
You're there because you claim to have the same politics as this party, and this is the party in government that is shaping the lives of all of us, and that's why this matters, and that's why we have to have this conversation. Elena, what do you think of that bizarre interview?
There's a couple of points. I mean, the first thing I go with is I totally agree with you. 100%. You're so erudite in explaining the difference between the kind of idealist approach to analysing this with the materialist approach to analysing it under this kind of what I would like this kind of culture of neoliberalism, where everything is an individual failing. Everything is like a personal expression of someone's personal moral framework, rather than the effects of a structure or a system or the kind of society that we live in and the material effects of those failures. Like, there's a really great part in ContraPoint's video on cancellation where she talks about this essentialization that we have of people. When we take things that people say that are racist, like these comments were racist, we want to dismiss an individual as being a racist. Well, that's a bad person doing a bad thing in this really kind of, in this microcosm of an individual, rather than what does that say about how we've managed to get to this position where somebody can say something like this, then these views can be held and these ideologies can permeate through society. And I think that's a really good that's a really good summary of that on your end there. I appreciate that. One thing I would say though is I think that one discussion that we need to have broadly on the left as well is that there's always this two sides of a discussion about kind of the liberal identity politics of something, which is usually from something that extricates class from discussion, and there are class reductionists who refuse to include social elements in the way that they look at systems of power we have in this country. And we can see in somebody there who is part of a kind of the higher kind of class echelons of society, you get these realizations that these class systems that you belong to are not going to protect you. They're not going to protect you fully against the effects of societal racism, structural racism, and white supremacy in this country. Whereas kind of the liberal identity politics people will only see this as being an issue of an individual racist. And the class reductionists will say, well, actually, it's just as class position. We actually have a proper intersectional analysis of how we can get to this point. Then that's the only way we can actually achieve true liberation and true emancipation, rather than looking at through an individual kind of myopic framework on either side of that discussion.
Thank you so much, Helena, for joining me tonight. I really enjoyed this first time that we've been on together. I think we have good rapport.
I agree. It's been wonderful. I look forward to the next time. It'll be great to be back.
Thanks to all of you for tuning in. Make sure to come back for tomorrow's stream. You've been watching Novara Media. Good night.